Into the wild I'll go, and into the wild I am. It's been a while, freedom child, since I left my roots back home. Into the wild I'll go, and into the wild I am. It's been a while, freedom child, since I left my roots back home.
Welcome to the Freebirth Society podcast. This is a radical space for women who are ready to celebrate their autonomous choices in birth, motherhood, and beyond. Together, we'll learn about wild birth through personal narrative, we'll explore the politics of birth, and we'll analyze everything that relates to our lives as women from a feminist perspective. Here's your host, Emily Saldea.
It's been a while, freedom child, since I left my roots back home.
If you're like most of my listeners, you are devouring these episodes, fascinated by the women's stories, and wondering if you could do this too. Do you wish that you had a step-by-step strategy for how to actually plan and manifest your free birth? Our complete guide to free birth is the #1 course for free birth, and we made it for women just like you. It's a self-guided, online, intensive course that will teach you everything we think you need to know about how to birth freely and in your power. We'll take you all the way from unpacking industrial care to what DIY prenatal care looks like, how to pick and prep your support team, what to expect, look out for, and how to shift when more support could be needed. Yes, we'll cover the what ifs, how to prevent complications, and how to orient your entire life towards a powerful birth. So head on over to freebirthsocietycourses.com now and take the first step towards the birth of your dreams. Despite learning in her pregnancy that the baby Amana was growing would be incompatible with life, Amana, as a first-time mother, decided to move forward with her plan to birth her daughter at home. Through this first birth experience, she learned that birth and death are one. Amana shares with us today the wisdom of a resilient woman who has walked through the fires of free birth, death, life, and loss again and again. Welcome, Amana.
Thank you. Thank you.
Excited to have you here, and I know you have lots of stories and lots of different stories to share. Yeah, let's just dive on in. Take us to the beginning of where you would kind of mark your mothering journey beginning.
Well, for me, I was one of those people who I always knew I wanted to be a mom. I was obsessed with babies and birth from a very young age. There are photos of me like feeding my next door neighbor who's 15 months younger than me, like standing on telephone books and like feeding her in her high chair.
Oh, that's cute.
So I just always knew I wanted to be a mom. And then I found myself like in my early 30s without children, without a man to make babies with, and put a call out to the universe to my soul babies. I knew that I had soul babies, and I asked them to help me find my soul flame and their father. And I did a 40-day ritual and asked him to meet me at this festival, and this little butterfly flew in front of my face and led me to him. And he proposed 2 weeks later. We got married a few months later, and we're open for our soul babies to come through, shortly after that.
Wow.
And so, at that time I had been attending births as a birth assistant for a few years already, had witnessed home births and birth center births, and knew that I wanted to have my babies at home. And we conceived our first little spark of life, my first little wombling. I was super excited. And then at 6 weeks, I started to bleed and had an early birth with that baby. I was sad and, mad, but.
Was that your first pregnancy ever?
Yeah, my first pregnancy ever.
And did you just stay home and release the pregnancy?
Yeah, we were actually on our way to like our honeymoon in Hawaii. So I was bleeding like on the plane and in Hawaii. And
Oh,
that was a little hard dynamically, just like he didn't understand how sad I was in that moment, but he was trying to support me in any way that he could. But I was so glad to be like in the ocean and allowing, my blood to flow there, and remembering that like one drop is then the whole ocean. And yeah. Then we, had this little, our baby altar, and we're really calling in our next soul baby and asking them to stay, and welcomed in another soul near the new year. And so then I was pregnant again and so happy, and just kept talking to that little wombly and asking them to stay. And I was super nauseous and vomiting that pregnancy. And I found a midwife, a single practice midwife that I decided to engage in care with.
what's single practice mean?
Like the midwife practice that I had worked with before when I was attending births, it was like 3 midwives where, you don't know which midwife is going to be there. And so I chose a single practice.
This woman showing up.
Yeah. She was a licensed midwife, and she was within her licensure as supportive as she could be of, non-intervention. All of her daughters had babies and didn't have ultrasounds and things like that. And anyhow, I was choosing not to have an ultrasound either, although I'd sort of said to this little wombling, like, if that is something that you need, sort of let me know. And when I was around 6 months pregnant, could feel this little baby moving inside of me. And I started having this right-sided pain that I didn't know what it was. I thought maybe it was round ligament pain or something like that, just because I hadn't gotten to experience pregnancy before. And then I started having bloody urine. And that's when I decided to go into the medical system and get some testing done. And it turned out I had, like through my blood, I had an infection, and they did an ultrasound of my like kidney and such. And I had a blocked right ureter, which is a tube like from your kidney down to your bladder. The tube between those two was blocked. And they said that, if I didn't unblock it, that would become, more of a problem, and that I could have a full body, infection that would cause harm to me and my baby. I wound up then deciding to have a stent placed.
Whoa.
So it was like, yeah.
That's hardcore.
Yeah. So I had a stent placed while, in pregnancy, and it was really uncomfortable. But I sort of took that as a sign that I decided to then have an ultrasound for the baby. So after I'd been discharged from the hospital, I went back and I did have an ultrasound. And it was through that ultrasound that they told me that this baby inside of me did not have any kidneys, and so didn't have a bladder. And, without kidneys, they don't make urine, and their lungs don't develop. And so her lungs were super small. And I was told that she wouldn't survive once she was born.
Oh, that's so, so big. Yeah. And so that's 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
And you're also not like super well, but does this fix, like, are you fixed? Are you fine after that health wise? And is it just about the baby? Like, just how do you, I mean, this is a giant question. Yeah. How do you, like, who are you over those next 3-4 months of pregnancy? Tell me about the choice you made to continue onwards with the pregnancy. And I know in some states you have the medical support to end pregnancies that late if it's incompatible with life. Just tell us about that, because it's one of those just impossible discoveries.
Right. So I'm in Washington State, and they did offer for me to induce labor, but I chose not to. I was, so sad, distraught, angry, angry at the world, angry at my body. like not understanding, like, why do I have this great desire to have babies? And then this is my experience. Like, I can feel this baby moving inside of me. And it was a really hard time. And then also I was able to then move forward in those next months and really kind of cherish and hold space and create intentional memories with this little baby, knowing that this would be the time that I had with them. Went to see different family members, would do things like, read blueberries for Sal while I was eating blueberries, and talk to this baby and say, this is what blueberries taste like, and just things like that felt good. I was lucky enough to have a beautiful community of women that gave me an incredible blessing way ceremony. Obviously not your typical blessing way ceremony, but we all knew that, she would die. And yet women, 15 women in my community showed up and created this beautiful space and held me and my baby and honored this mother experience that I was going through.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, I'm so glad you had that. So is there anything more to say about your choice to continue on with the pregnancy and say yes to her little short life? Or, because it's not, as as a birth worker, that's not the most popular choice.
Right.
Most women in the Western world that I am aware of statistically absolutely choose to end the pregnancy.
Right. And I mean, I can understand and, honor women that make that choice. But for me, it was like no questions. Like, that was not my choice. I still wanted to birth my baby at home. From the ultrasound, we knew she was bummed down. And so I was going to be birthing her breech at home. And my midwife was super comfortable with that. And she was just like really beautifully supportive and held me in that grieving space.
So she didn't hesitate on, let's do this. That's awesome. Yeah. So a fetus doesn't need, like a womb doesn't need the bladder for the amniotic fluid. Like you went to term with her. I guess I didn't totally realize that you could stay pregnant that long. You know what I'm saying? Like without that
without the amniotic fluid and such. Yeah. I mean, there was it just felt so synchronistic that it was like that I had this like kidney thing to then discover that she didn't have. It felt very like this was her call to tell me. I didn't know she was a girl at the time. But there's the risk when there's not amniotic fluid, like there was a risk of cord compression, that she might die inside my womb before she got to term or in labor. So I knew that those were possibilities, but she was still, alive. And
it probably isn't the case that there's no fluids. It's probably just that there's not an abundance of it.
Right.
I would imagine. Because there's still blood and stuff.
Sure. There's some, and her water wound up, I never had like a sensation of her water breaking the way I have with other births, and I was in the water when I birthed her. So it's hard for me to say if there was any or not. I have thought about like, what would it have been like if I hadn't had that ultrasound? And for me, I was grateful that I'd had it, because I would have still had birthed her at home. And if she was born and she wasn't breathing, I have done neonatal resuscitation. Like, I would have been trying to resuscitate her. I would have taken her to the hospital, I think. And I'm glad that I knew, because that allowed me to just like hold her in tenderness and not have like those few moments of her being alive be also like filled with like panic and pain and things like that.
Was she born already gone?
She was born alive. Yeah.
Okay.
She didn't open her eyes, but she was born alive.
And how long was there a sense that she was alive for?
Just moments, I birthed her in the birthing pool, and her little bum came out and her legs flopped out and her legs were moving. My husband was right behind me, and I said, like, feel our baby move, baby's alive. And he felt her kick, and She was born just like up to like here, like this part was left inside, and then I gave one more push and she was born. And I held her, and when I pulled her up from the water, her eyes were closed and she took a few kind of gasping breaths, and then her soul was gone.
Wow.
Yeah.
So then in your most recent free birth, did you get ultrasounds or did you just go full?
No, in my son's pregnancy, I did choose to have an ultrasound to see that he had all of his parts.
Sure.
And also knowing that doesn't mean that he's going to be born alive or live after that.
Yeah.
But for me, I wanted to know that. In my daughter's pregnancy, my last one, I chose not to. So I didn't know before she was born if she had everything or not. Yeah.
That's big work, man. Woo! Okay. So your first daughter is born.
Yeah. And her labor was super long, by the way. It was like over a few days. Because when I went, I didn't want to go into labor. I knew labor meant birth, which meant death.
Oh.
So I just, was holding on when I went into labor. I like had a glass of wine and like took a bath, tried to like slow things down. It, happened over 3 days. And, eventually I did birth her.
What gestation around were you?
Right around 37 weeks.
Okay, on the earlier end.
So on the earlier end, which is more common for babies that don't have kidneys. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so then who are you after that?
After that, I was a mess for a while.
And in a new marriage, that's so hard.
Yeah, absolutely. And everyone grieves differently. Grief is unique with each like experience and each person. And like, I really wanted to, like, I held on to her body for like 34 hours after she was born and, kept her at home and carried her around and slept with her. And my husband had a hard time being with her body afterwards.
Yeah. On that note, would you actually flesh that out a little bit? Because that's not, again, that's not even like something that most women know they have the option of. And that's a really important thing to know about when you birth at home. So you have this medical midwife that I'm assuming is straddling some sort of legal, like how does this go? So the baby is born, she's gone. And you need to get a death certificate. And what's like the legal parameters in Washington of keeping a body in home? Like, I only know what it is in California, but did you keep her body cool? Was someone like teaching you how to do all of this? Did your midwife have a ton of knowledge in this?
Yeah, she didn't have a ton of knowledge. She'd communicated with like one of the physicians at the hospital who, told me. And so because if they knew the baby was going to die, there wasn't like, it was okay for her to be there. And, she handled a lot of the legal stuff that I didn't really have to take that on. And,
That's
I
nice.
was allowed. Yeah. She gave me some like instructions of things that I could do with baby, but I didn't like keep my baby cold. I didn't. Hartley is what we called her, and I held her with me, and like I gave her a bath and anointed her with oils and brought her out into the daylight for a little bit. And my dad came and saw her, and yeah. So, and we could have kept her longer, but after a few days, there is, a smell and things start to shift and change. And I was ready, not ready, to have the one thing that you can't do is like, we couldn't transport her body to the funeral home where we were having her cremated. We couldn't like bury her ourselves. We had to have someone you have to have
a licensed funeral driver.
A license to transport a dead body.
And then you did cremate her.
And then we did cremate her. Yeah, we cremated her. We picked up her ashes and we decided to take a road trip down the Oregon coast and down into the redwoods. And, that felt good to kind of be away from our normal space. And I carried her ashes with me everywhere. I was pumping milk because I wanted to donate. So at that time I was like pumping and like dumping the milk, or, releasing the milk into the ocean or the redwoods, wherever we were. We sprinkled some of her ashes in a couple of places, and that felt good.
Wow,
Yeah.
what an initiation into that part of motherhood, that section of motherhood that lots of women won't even ever know. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Okay. So then what happens?
And then, we are still open. We open again to receiving another little soul. Yeah. I mean, we were open to it pretty soon. We never used any preventative measure after that, but my body was wise. It didn't conceive right. I didn't conceive right away. It was several months later that then another little soul came into my womb, and I was pregnant again, and of course excited and nervous and having all the feels. I was with the same midwife at the time, and I did decide to have an ultrasound to see, we talked about the different possibilities, and she was still comfortable with me not having one, and at that point I hadn't even heard of free birth, so I didn't know that was in the realm, but I chose to have an ultrasound.
She sounds awesome.
She's amazing.
I mean, that sounds like exactly what makes sense to choose. It's not like she violated you.
No, not no.
Or that you were a victim to all the nonsense we always talk about. It sounds like she was a really helpful woman in your life.
Yes.
Thank God.
Yes, she was. And she actually, right after Hartley was born in our home, she bought a house that was just a few doors down from us, which was really fun. Yeah. I think it was 16 weeks was when they said the earliest was that they could see whether or not baby had kidneys. And so I did it at 16 weeks. And then in that they said, if you come back at 20 weeks, then we can really tell and make sure. And I did go back at 20 weeks. And then after that, no more after that. And continued to plan a home birth with that baby. And his pregnancy was so smooth compared to Hartley's. And I puked once. I was not puking every day. And that felt really nice. And, again, grateful that baby had all of their parts, and also held the knowing that didn't mean he would be born alive.
So what was your level of coming up into that birth? Did you feel just everything, or were you fairly anxious? Were you able to drop into some realms of trust and getting truly excited to have your baby finally, or what was that like?
I was excited. I still had, bought baby clothes and baby things. I know some women who experience a stillbirth then choose not to buy any diapers or any clothes or anything until baby is born and breathing. But that wasn't my path. And I had some anxiety, but also was just really excited and hopeful, and, spoke to this little baby and was like, please, breathe right away and cry right away. I, have witnessed enough births that I knew that there's a wide spectrum of what's normal for breathing after birth. But I just was like, please just don't linger.
Don't mess with me.
Totally. Yeah. So for him, I was 40 weeks and one day, and I woke up to labor early in the morning, and I'd first sort of tried to stay in bed for a moment and was like, no, this isn't happening. And so I got out of bed and labored on my own for a while, and that felt nice. And then I decided to send my husband a text message that I figured he would receive when he woke up and turned his phone or his ringer on or whatever. But he forgot to turn his ringer off. So it was 5, or I guess it was almost 6 in the morning when I sent him the message just to be I'm in labor. Don't just stay in the bedroom. Come out here and be with me. But I wanted him rested in case it was another long labor. But his ringer was on. So he woke up and came out and was like, oh my gosh, you're in labor. He was so excited. And I had my little list of things that I wanted him to do, like clean the toilet in case I was gonna puke, and a few other little things. And I was baking some bread and had it rising by the fire. This was like the end of December, so really cozy and fireplace and snowy. And he asked if he could take a shower, and I was like, yeah, sure. You want some eggs? I made him some eggs. And then kind of when he got out of the shower and was in my space, the contractions just really increased in intensity, and I decided to get in the shower to see if that would help ease the sensations at all. It didn't really. They just kept coming, but were like inconsistent in timing. I was timing them a little bit, and he was trying to get the birth pool set up for me, and I was like, oh, like this is getting hard. And I decided to just fill the regular bath, and I started wanting to have him close to me, and was just like, forget the freaking birth pool, just stay with me. And he was like, should I call the midwife? And then he did. And between when he called her and she arrived, like my water broke in the bathtub. I felt like that pop, and he saw the little gush of blood, and he was like, oh, is that okay? And I'm like, yes, it's okay. And she arrived. I was starting to feel, I was feeling pushy. And when she came, she just, arrived, set her bag down, kind of like looked, and she was like, oh yeah, like I can see baby's head. And 7 minutes later, he emerged and cried right away. And he had a really short cord. I couldn't like quite get him up to my chest. I kind of had to hold him down here. And I felt sort of out of it because I think just it going so quickly, I wasn't expecting that. I was a little sort of out and in within myself, but so grateful that he was alive and breathing.
How many hours was the labor?
About 6.
Mm-hmm. And he was perfect.
Yeah. And he was perfect and beautiful, and placenta was birthed super easily. I decided to cut our cord myself, and we got into bed, and he nursed like a champ from the beginning, like loved being attached to the boob, and that was great. Mm-hmm.
Oh, thank God.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Sounds like a great midwife too.
Mm-hmm.
Like knowing what you know now, do you have any? Well, I guess we'll just move into it. Well, because I guess you have a couple more pregnancies in between, but like what happens for you in this evolution between your son and your daughter, where you don't hire her again, and what, like, who do you become that is different for you?
Yeah. So it was after my son was born that then like the word free birth and the concept like came into my sphere. And I was like, oh, okay, like that makes sense. And then I was reflecting on like my mother line, and that my mother was an unplanned, unassisted birth. And I'm like, okay, like, my ancestors did it, and just really
everyone's ancestors did it.
Yeah, exactly. So I knew I wanted to do that for my next birth at that time. And also was like reflecting back to my son's birth, and how, because I had expected or envisioned my birth with her present, I sort of held and waited for her to arrive to birth my baby, and I had some like fear around that. Totally. And if I had just planned for her not to be there, it wouldn't be the same feeling. I'm just like, okay, the next time I'm just going to plan for her not to be there. And
gosh, even just that point, which has nothing to do with our critiques of medical midwifery. It has nothing to do with, like, that could show up that could show up with anybody, it's not even specific to the midwife. Just that is such a big deal, to tilt and have what you need in your home, have what you think you need, have what you think you want, just already with you. Just that psychological shift, I think is like not talked about enough, because I mean, it happens with women I attend. It happens, I'm sure, with women you attend. It's not something we can get out of if somebody wants someone who doesn't live with them there, right? It just automatically adds that layer that can it can be so subtle. Sometimes it's really obvious, but sometimes it's really subtle, and it's not until I show up or until, I hear stories of whoever, even if it's the sister showing up, that the woman can like fully relax. And yeah, I've been thinking a lot about that lately because I travel fairly far for births, or I'm willing to, in the right circumstances. And it's tricky with that element. And it's kind of like hard to talk about, because it can show up really subtly. Yeah. But even just that, I think, is such an important shift of why women do choose free birth. It's not necessarily from trauma and betrayal and restrictions of licensure and all this heady shit. It's also like, what if I just knew I had everything I needed when I woke up and found myself in labor, and what a liberating, powerful, relaxing concept.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So between my son and my living daughter, I experienced 2 early births, one at 11 weeks and another one at 6 weeks.
Amen.
And my 11-week loss, she was an unexpected pregnancy that we were, tracking our cycle. I was tracking my cycle and we're trying not to conceive. And then she appeared and I was super excited and grateful. My son was just over a year. So I was like, oh my gosh, like I'm going to have like 2 under 2. And when I looked up, from my last menstrual cycle, like when my 40 weeks would be, it was on my birthday, November 20th. And that felt like so sweet and beautiful and aligned. I was conceived when my mother was on birth control. So I'm like, okay, like I was that one that like came on through anyway. And she's like coming on through anyway. So I was really excited and happy. And my sister-in-law was pregnant at the same time, due just like a week apart. And then I started bleeding at 11 weeks and was really, really sad. And, it's hard because people around me, like one thing that we talk about in the loss community, like some people say to you, it's not going to happen again. Like when you have one, and it's always like, F you have no idea. Like,
meaning when you have one miscarriage?
Yeah.
Of course it could happen again.
Exactly. But some people say it won't, which is
that's
ridiculous.
Crazy. That's crazy.
And
11 weeks is like, you've let your guard down a little bit about it. Like that's not just finding out and a couple days later. That's really enough to be truly. Yeah.
So that happened. We named her Nyla Rose, and I buried some of her with a plum tree and some rose bushes, and that felt nice. And
you birthed her at home?
I tried to. She is my baby that I tried to birth at home. I labored, and then I could feel that there was still, like when I felt inside of myself, I could feel coming out of my cervix some of the like sac and whatnot that wasn't coming out. And so I, held on to that for a couple of weeks and wound up then eventually trying to use some pharmaceuticals, but she still didn't come out. And eventually I did go into the hospital and have a D&C.
So you could feel that there was still pregnancy tissue. The medication didn't get it out. Ugh, it's brutal.
Yeah.
Of course. And you spiked a fever, which was your indication to go in, right?
Yeah, I spiked a fever and it, started to smell. The tissue was starting to rot inside of me. And then I had the fever and was, wanted to go in and have her removed the rest of the way. So that's what I did. When I went in and I said I wanted to keep the baby, they were like, well, we have to send it off to pathology and whatever. And I was like, no, you don't. Like, I can keep it. And I asked to speak to the house supervisor, and, you know, it wound up that then the doctor didn't really want me to be allowed to keep it, but she took a sample and I was able to.
My understanding of, because it's not really a DNC anymore, it's vacuum, right? And so the vacuum goes into a machine. So did you not have that? Because what, like, the things I've seen when I've been with women who have abortions, you know, like a tube, I'm forgetting the word, goes into the cervix, vacuums out the contents. Yeah, thank you. And then there's like a machine that it goes into. But is that not what happened for you?
That's a great question. I mean, they called it a DNC and I wasn't awake during the procedure, so I can't tell you what happened exactly.
You weren't awake. Whoa, that's intense. Huh. Okay. At 11 weeks. Wow. That's kind of unusual. You were totally sedated? Wow. And was it in a clinic or a hospital?
A hospital.
Huh. Okay. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Okay. So we don't know then.
So I don't know. But they, you know, had it in like a Tupperware. Yeah.
They say DNC still everywhere, even though that's not really in first worlds. That's not really, no one's scraping. That's not it, you know, it's a vacuum now, but obviously I wasn't there. So maybe it was that, but yeah, anyway, I've been in the room and seen it. And I've always thought, because I've been with women who have asked for the baby, the pregnancy tissue, whatever. And they're like, it like physically can't work that way given how they extract it. Anyway, but so you were given something, like, was it notable? Like what was that like?
Yeah, it was like, you know, there were some blood clots and it was like, you know, a sac with placenta E. I had also already passed some in my early birth labor. So I couldn't notably like necessarily see baby.
Because also at 11 weeks, the range of when the fetus stopped living could have been at 5 weeks.
Absolutely.
And that's another thing, you know, obviously you and I know that, but I think it's important to share because, you know, women, we have such lost knowledge on this whole topic. And, you know, and the lost knowledge really contributes to over engaging in the system, not saying in any way saying that you did, but you know what I mean? Like just not knowing anything. And so you go in and just do whatever, and you don't even know what happened to you. And, you know, so many women have that experience, but yeah, that at any point from the spark of pregnancy, I mean, it can take, at any point in the pregnancy, not even in the first trimester, at any point in the pregnancy, you know, fetus can die, and it can take months before you release, which is intense. But because we're in the free birth world, like I know lots of women who've done that, where it's taken, you know, them at all different trimesters, months, which is so different than what we would think, you know, when you see a doctor, you like get that out as soon as it's figured out.
Right. You know, a few months go by and we do conceive again, and then that pregnancy ends at 6 weeks, and that was, you know, uncomplicated, and was able to birth that baby at home. And then I was sort of just like, oh my gosh, like maybe we're not gonna get this next baby, like maybe my son is my only living child, and sort of coming to terms with that. And also like feeling like this soul and spirit was there, that my daughter was, you know, going to come, and, you know, had some moments with universe being like, you know, now is the time, like I'm in my mid-30s, like, and then near summer solstice of 2019, I guess it would have been, we conceived again, and it was my daughter, and I was super nauseous and puking again, like I was in Hartley's pregnancy, puking, like, you know, get up to go to the bathroom and I'm puking, roll over in bed, I'm puking, my husband is ready. Yeah.
Brutal, dude.
My husband like even like wrote me little love notes on like the back of the toilet, see, like, you're amazing, bought me like a knee board because I was always like kneeling at the porcelain throne. Yeah, that sucked. But, it was what it was. I was grateful to be pregnant. The one thing that I did decide to do in this pregnancy in the medical system was to get the 10-week maternal blood test, because I wanted to know if baby was a boy or a girl. I went through some grief with my son, expecting he was going to be a girl and having him be a boy. And so anyway, I just did decide to do that one blood test and then nothing else after that. So her pregnancy was hard, yet I was like, knew she was a girl by blood also. And I was just like so grateful that she was a girl, that she was growing in my womb. And it was reminding me of Hartley's pregnancy. So there were, I was like, and it was hard. I was like depressed just because I was nauseous all the time. It was hard to be like, I'm happy because I'm pregnant, and yet I'm like miserable and puking and nauseous and just like, and it paralleled Hartley's pregnancy in that way, which in moments I was like, does this mean that this baby also doesn't have kidneys? But I, was like, probably she does. And I think it was a little harder for some people around me, people asking, are you sure you don't want to get an ultrasound to know? And I was just always
why
clear.
didn't you?
I didn't want to. I knew the harms of ultrasound, and I even had at that point, like felt bad that I did that with my son. I didn't really understand the harms on the same level when I had my ultrasound with my son, but at that point I like really did. And I really just didn't, I was like, it wouldn't change. I wouldn't then choose to induce labor. I would still carry that baby. I would still want to have that baby at home, and I would still want to birth her at home, even if she was going to die. So it wouldn't change my path. So I just chose not to.
I mean, that's such a good point, right? That's such an important decision-making aspect that I would like to see more women consider. Like, what would knowing any of this change? And if it's nothing, I mean, I guess you could argue for like the preparation of it, right? Like the emotional, literal preparation has value for some people. For other people, it would just be a stressful, horrific, time knowing. Anyway, and then you also have the reference point now of a healthy son, which is so helpful.
Yeah, so for her, I'm just like so excited and like waiting for birth to come and for the nausea and puking to be gone. I know people kept being like second trimester, and then people were like, okay, third trimester, and it just continued and continued.
That's so brutal. Wow.
Yeah, but it was what it was. And, she's my fiery baby, and that was like her expression of fire from within. Yes.
Anything else you want to say before you tell the story about like choosing free birth and not having the midwife, and how's your partner feel? And just, is there anything else to kind of prep the setup?
Not really. I mean, my husband was a little bit nervous, and yet he trusted me and was supportive of the choice. And, he kind of felt the same way that, the midwife was there just 7 minutes before our son was born. Like, I can do this without her. Like, no biggie. My main things were like, okay, you're going to have to like wipe my poop and deal with the blood. And, and he's like, okay, I can do that.
Yeah.
So
the least he can do.
Yeah. I didn't like tell a ton of people that was my plan. Most people assumed I was going to have a midwife present, and I just sort of allowed that because I didn't want to deal with talking about it with a lot of people. Yeah, we knew that this would probably, if this baby survived, that this would be my last pregnancy and birth. I turned 40 this year, and, I'm super grateful to be where I'm at and have these 2 living babies. Yeah, so I had, been in the birth world and for a long time, and I really did want photos and video of this birth, as I knew it would be probably my last. And so I did invite a couple women in my community to be at my birth that are dear friends to mine, one to take pictures and one to do video. Hartley and Odin had both been born in water, so I really sort of envisioned this birth as a land birth or a dry birth, and created that space in my living room, and had mirrors and artwork of women and women with babies, and photos of, you know, my mother and my grandmother and my other grandmother. And yeah, really enjoyed preparing the space and preparing for labor. I was 40 weeks on March 16th of 2020. And that's sort of when COVID came into the whole sphere. And so, you know, as I approached that time is when that was all happening. And I definitely, you know, felt some fear initially when I didn't understand and didn't know, and had this, you know, precious new life inside of me. My son was born just one day after 40 weeks. So I sort of thought I would, you know, birth her before that. I thought she was going to be a Pisces, and she was not. She stayed in until 41 weeks and a couple of days. And oh, we had done some work with my son. He was 3 at that time, and he wanted to be present at this baby's birth. I'd showed him lots of videos and talked to him about it, and told him, you know, what sounds I might be making and things like that. We did invite my mother-in-law to come and be with us so that she could be sort of his person if in the moment he decided he didn't want to be there, that he could be with her somewhere else. And so she was staying with us at the time, and I went into labor early in the morning again, woke up to really strong contractions that were, yeah, fierce and strong. And I never really found a rhythm with them. I got out of bed kind of right away, tried different, yeah, like, try different positions, right? Nothing changed the sensations. They just kept being strong and consistent. I didn't time them at all. I woke up my husband a little bit later, and he was present with me and, you know, held me and was just with me during them. And that felt good. We called my friends Rakana and Clementine, and they, you know, entered the space really beautifully, and I enjoyed their loving presence, and labor continued to progress. And then when I started sort of feeling the pushy feelings, I had them wake up my mother-in-law, and she got my son, and they came out into the space, and he was really sweet and, you know, like, oh, mama. And he was just right there with us.
That didn't feel like too many people.
It didn't.
Nice.
No, it felt really good. Yeah. There was, in my earlier labor, like, my mother-in-law came out because she heard us, and I didn't like having her in the space then, and asked her to, you know, go somewhere else, and she did. But at that point, no, I was glad that she was there and that my son was there. And I had, you know, like a mirror, a big mirror, and I wound up like in front of this full length mirror, and I had this kind of circular mirror down below, and I was just sitting on the floor with my husband behind me. And so I enjoyed, he's tall, he's 6'9". So
what?
Yeah.
Whoa, that's really tall. I'm 5'1", so that would be hilarious. Are you kind of tall?
I'm like 5'7".
Okay.
So tallish, but not tall like that.
Yeah.
No. Yeah, I know. I asked universe for a tall man. I had no idea he was going to be quite so tall. But yeah. Wow. So I really enjoyed having the mirror, because even though he was behind me, we could have like the eye contact through the mirror, which felt really nice. And I started to feel baby emerging. I was not ready for it. I held my hand over her head and over me for several contractions as I, you know, sort of allowed the stretching and just like, whoa, you're just like busting through, you know. Yeah. Well, I went into labor around 2, and she was born a little before 6 a.m. So 4 hours. So I, you know, held her, and then eventually it was like, oh, okay, I gotta let her come. And I released my hand and her head came out, and then she did her little turn, and then she was born up to like kind of her belly button. The cord was sort of like lassoed around her, and my husband helped me to kind of hold her so that I could unloop the cord, and then her little button legs fell out, and I pulled her to my chest, and we all cried, and I looked and was like, oh, you really are a girl. And everyone was just there and in love and in awe, and she was breathing right away, and it was magical and beautiful.
Sounds like it. Perfection.
Yeah. And then just a few minutes later, I could feel the placenta ready to birth. I had this little pie dish that I wanted to birth it in. So I just like I was holding her and I just went onto my knees. I don't know. I was on like a painting cloth. We had a painting cloth on our carpet.
Oh, that's a smart idea.
Yeah.
That's a really smart idea. Like a big canvas kind of.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And we had it like, it was huge. So we had it doubled over, and it was enough to stop anything from getting to the carpet.
That's better than a tarp.
Yeah.
I wouldn't
want to be on a, and slippy and.
Okay, learning all sorts of tips from you. Okay, I love it. So placenta, easy peasy.
Then everyone, helps me and baby to move to the bed. My husband is like using a washcloth to get like the blood off of my feet and things, and they do a fresh squeezed juice for me. And I had decided that with this cord, I wanted to do a cord burning. So I got 4 really long tapered beeswax candles, and we did that in the bedroom. I'd asked my friends Clementine and Rakana and my mother-in-law to each hold one. So they each held a candle, and myself, so the 4 of us women there held the candles, and my daughter was like awake and looking at the fire. And it, took just a few minutes with those 4 candles to burn the cord. And then she was separate from her placenta, and she latched beautifully and nursed, and life was complete.
That's so sweet. I can picture it. So tell me a little bit about from her. Okay, so that was 2020, you said? So that was only 2.5 years ago or something? Right? So what is life like for you now as a free birther, a birth worker? And then I know you also do work with bereaved mothers and parents. So we can kind of end on that note. Just anything you want to share about your work and who you are now.
Yeah, so I mentor and support women in the seasons of pregnancy, birthing, and mothering through conscious dialogue. I really love incorporating ceremony and ritual, somatic experiencing, and movement in the care that I provide. Some of it is in person and some of it is virtual. And yeah, I have unique offerings for women who are experiencing early birth loss or infant loss, and to navigate those waves of grief and be able to connect with someone who has, walked a similar path.
And what's your website?
It's www.birthingnova.love.
Awesome. And we'll put that in the show notes also.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to say before we wrap?
I guess, I have a podcast called The Heart of the Soul, which also has stories of birth, life, and death, and remembering what it means to be wild women walking upon this earth.
Beautiful. All right. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
And that's it for today, my sisters. Check out everything we do, including one-on-one and group coaching, learn about our private membership, in-person retreats, and more on freebirthsociety.com. Our online courses are on freebirthsocietycourses.com, including our flagship course, The Complete Guide to Free Birth. Don't miss the Radical Birthkeeper School if you're ready to become the authentic midwife that women are searching for. Together we rise, and the revolution starts inside each of us. I'll leave you with our Free Birth Society theme song, Wild Woman by Aruba Red. I honor you for the wisdom you held, the ancient traditions of plant medicine and womb magic. I feel the spirit of the ancestors as I place my hands upon my belly. This sacred portal will be honored. Eons upon light beams of survival, withstanding the eradication of our power by design. I will not allow the separation of our young to be forced upon me. My sisters will no longer birth in captivity. The picket line redefined from burning our wild women to paralyzing us and drugging our babes. Strapped down in a clinical white bed, drying up the milk from our breasts. Keep your needles. My family will never again be doomed to chase those dragons or your poison. We reject your fear. We choose love. Everything with intention. Death, ascension. I will fly and bring her back from the